Now available to purchase on Blu-ray is my latest feature-length documentary exploring the legacy of Street Fighter II, titled Here Comes a New Challenger. It explores all the updates to the game, from the World Warrior to Super Turbo. We cover the merchandise, the home ports to the 16-bit consoles and microcomputers. We delve deep into the live-action movie with director Stephen E. D'Souza, and we also cover the anime and more. We have interviews from those who worked at Capcom USA and Japan. We have insights from journalists who experienced Street Fighter II when it hit arcades, and additional interviews from fans and gamers who grew up with the most popular fighting game ever created. Follow the link below to grab your copy. It's limited edition, region free, and comes with additional special features. Hello everyone, it's Oliver here, and I'm back with a new audio commentary. And for this podcast, Audi Sorlie is joining me to discuss TIMECOP. How you doing, Audi?
Pretty good. We were supposed to do this a little bit earlier, but as you can probably tell, I still have a bit of cold in me. Got sick just as TIMECOP was about to start. But doing it fairly well, and this has been years in the making. I think we've done, 5 or 4 Van Damme commentaries?
I think, yeah, the ones that most recently is The Quest and Death Warrant.
Right. So, but we always mentioned, TIMECOP. And I think we both secretly wanted, a special edition or something to come out so we could officially do it.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's never going to happen. So let's just do it. God damn it.
Yeah. Okay, folks, you can enjoy this podcast by itself, but if you wish to sync this commentary with your own copy of the film, put the timestamp to 0 on your DVD or Blu-ray and press play now. And yeah, as you were saying, there hasn't been a special edition of this movie. I think there must be some sort of legal limbo, because it's on the sort of later releases of this, on the sort of into HD, they took away the sort of Largo sort of JVC sort of idents, and maybe there's some sort of conflict between those people. But weirdly, that the most popular Van Damme film, box office wise, has just been sort of left, by Universal by the wayside, and just puts out in their sort of back catalogue of work, and that's it.
I mean, this was a huge release, at least for me, and I do remember that, among the movies that were coming out at the time from Van Damme, there was a lot of stock put into this, because this was 94. And I forget if this came right before Street Fighter or right after, but it was in around the same time.
It was just before Street Fighter, so he would have done this, then jumped onto Street Fighter.
And it's definitely an interesting contrast to how Street Fighter played out, both critically. I mean, the box office for Street Fighter was good, but critically this was a very different story than what we saw from Street Fighter. But to your point with the copyrights, this is an interesting property because it was based on a very short run of comics from Dark Horse, and kind of done by some of the bigger names at Dark Horse. I think it was called A Man at a Time Cop.
That's right, and it sort of dealt, and the story of the comics isn't translated to the movie because it goes back to 1930s and dealing with diamonds.
Diamonds in South Africa. And yeah, it's more like a Judge Dredd kind of vibe than what this movie is. But I think it was Mike Richardson and Mark Verheyen that did this for Dark Horse, and they were very involved with the screenplay for this. So I think the elements that work with the comic, because the comic is a bit strange. I have it, and it's not there they are. Yeah, Mike Richardson and Mark Verheyen. The comic isn't the best idea that Dark Horse necessarily had, but there are kind of elements there that are interesting, and they managed to kind of put this into a screenplay that works, and mostly thanks to, I think, Peter Hames' direction.
Yeah, because I had the comic book as well, because it came out around the same time as in the UK. It was a 1 of 2 issue sort of special they put out, and I thought it was very strange because his outfit was very much, I suppose it's a little bit more of that 2000 AD look.
Yeah,
and that sort of carried over to the sort of the front cover design of the Super Nintendo game, and so forth. So because he wears these kind of weird shades, doesn't he? This kind of visor, like Cyclops, This bit always kind of it was always quite amusing, and it's kind of well played out directing wise. And but the guy from the future who's going to pull out these two machine guns, his cape seems to open by itself. It's like a motorized cape.
He just has like futuristic like pods that push out. It's a cape opener. You live in the now. If you're from the future, you'll understand.
He's a futuristic flasher.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So just all happens.
That was the original intent for it, and then they found other purposes for that tool. But this is like as you mentioned, this is a really cool way to start a movie and also get across kind of the concept and the stakes. To just kind of put it in the Civil War, which is an interesting era full of guns and war, but the weaponry from the Civil War is very iconic, right? The uniforms as well. So then putting that contrast of these two machine guns, I forget if it's like Tommy guns or like futuristic, like straight up assault rifles. I guess we'll find out.
Sort of machine guns with like this kind of laser targeting on them.
Yeah, you're right. Look at that. And he just plows through them, and it's just like you immediately get it. Okay, this guy is definitely not from this time. They're gonna mess up the past a little bit, and I think it's a really neat opening, and it only takes like 40 seconds. And now we know, now we understand.
It's good visual storytelling.
Yeah, they don't waste any. This is a pet peeve of mine a lot with sci-fi, is that they get so hung up on how things work. And they knew when putting this script together that time travel is dumb. Like, time travel is probably one of the dumbest devices we have in films. It's also one of the most exciting. And they're like, okay, we need the audience to understand how they time travel. Just like, what's the concept of this time travel? Is it a DeLorean? What is it? And they do it here in this scene, kind of explain that Dr. Clamp has come up with a device so he can go back in time. That's it. And that's the end of kind of the explanation. There's very little...
It's played out in a very sort of serious way, with little bits of humour kind of thrown in with that bullshit Star Wars program, he says. And we get to see Ron Silver very early on into the story, sort of instantly interested as a means to sort of make money. And because he's all, because I just said about people using it for profit and changing history.
What a great bad guy.
He's brilliant, isn't he?
Yeah,
really good. And some of the lines he has in the film are just sort of proper like trailer fodder quotes.
I think his performance, it's kind of like with Last Action Hero, is that the bad guy just kind of makes the movie, and you have that kind of feeling in this film as well. You remember it mostly thanks to Ron Silver's character, as we'll find out. Van Damme's character, Van Damme does a very good job in this film, but he doesn't say much. He communicates in other ways than words.
Yeah, there's also with the film, because we start out with Mark Isham's kind of score, which has this kind of big sort of percussion beats to it, but it's very much melodic kind of theme, very depressing theme actually, which is kind of the state in which we find Van Damme in the future of 2004. Yeah,
it's a very good score.
I really enjoy it. It's a good action score, but it's not the sort of like heroic score you'd find for an action piece. It's very, it's a bit more of a downbeat, and it kind of works. It fits the tone of the movie.
Yeah, it's not a Danny Elfman score, but it's it's a score that has a lot of it has emotional value to it. That's
a score by Mark, who he'd done Nowhere to Run.
Yeah, which also it's very good storytelling music, rather than like iconography music, like with so you don't have like a strong theme song necessarily, but you have very good foundational melodies in the scenes. So we were talking a little bit about the Dark Horse thing, and I think you also mentioned JVC, and I think that's a little bit of a clue where this movie has been sitting due to those rights issues. I don't know if we should say straight up rights issues, but I do think licensing for this movie is a little bit complicated due to this three-way ownership that was going on, because this was touted to be kind of like a multimedia series.
Yeah, it's very much at the time where even Pioneer were getting into funding movies. Things
Yeah.
like Cliffhanger, their names all over. That's why we got like 4 or 5 editions of Cliffhanger on Laserdisc.
Yeah,
So it's and I think they'd done a deal with Carolco or Carolco, how you pronounce it, and so yeah, this sort of thing at the time was this kind of jump to multimedia stuff, and as you might we sort of see is speculation that it's still stuck with JVC in some way, or they haven't agreed to something and been stubborn.
Yeah. So I think whatever's happening there is probably what's holding up a kind of proper re-release. Because I think the distribution rights are sitting comfortably with someone. Because there are Blu-rays of it, but transfers aren't great. I'd say they're fine. They're of the era of like early Blu-rays.
Oh, for sure. But as we're sort of talking about this, they had announced that Kino Lorber were doing Sudden Death, which is one of my favourite Van Damme movies.
Absolutely.
And one of the best Die Hard clones. So hopefully, because they're sort of sharing sort of similar producing. No, it wasn't a similar producing team, was it? Sam Raimi had only done Hard Target and this as sort of with Musha Diamond. But as you're saying, but with the comic, to go from this very short-lived comic to jumping onto a film very quickly, it seemed like they were sort of jumping onto these comic book assets or properties, to sort of capitalise on what's been happening with Batman and actually most of them, as we may have brought up before in other commentaries, that most of these kind of comic book movies had sort of didn't perform well, and people forget that TimeCop was a comic book movie, and it did very well.
Comic book movies really came to be. I mean, you had the '89 Batman, and from there you just had a huge ensemble. We think now that's a concept that's like now really big. I love the shot, by the way, of Van Damme.
Yes, it's iconic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really nice, and you can just tell that was just kind of like specifically for Van Damme. It's just like I have to show my kick, and it's like let's find a way for him to just keep that kick up there.
This was probably one of the movies that I was aware of that was coming out in cinemas, because obviously Universal Soldier was probably the one that got me interested into Van Damme, and then sort of seeking his back catalogue, because it was like the movie everyone wanted to watch on Sky Movies when it was sort of premiered, and TimeCop was really pushed on advertising. Despite it being an 18 rated movie, it sort of found itself sort of advertised at 6 o'clock or whatever, sort of this new Van Damme film was coming out, and they cherry picked some of the kind of big special effects sequences, especially with him ducking under the lorry, which we'll talk about later. But that really sold me on it. I was like, wow, that looks amazing, So I had to see it, and I was only like 12 when this came out, so I had to wait a year to see it on tape.
Now, I consider TimeCop to be in the series of dual roles for Van Damme, because he loves playing two versions of himself.
Does he get a double paycheck, though?
Probably not, but this is very much of that same ilk of, like, the Double Impact, and later on he did Replicant and
Maximum Risk, only briefly at the beginning.
Yeah, and here, while he isn't two different people, you could definitely say that he changes so much he might as well be with Max Walker, which is the most European name they could have given him. It's the same name in the comic, but you just every time he says his name in this movie, I find it funny. It's like, I'm Max Walker. It's like, all right, he sure looks like it.
And you also get the traditional Van Damme sex scene,
where you only see his nudity, not so much Mia Sara's.
She married Brian Henson, didn't she?
Was she married to Brian Henson?
Yeah.
I thought she was man.
She was. I think she.
She was married to like the son of Sean Connery for a while too, wasn't she?
I'm not entirely sure.
How many people did she marry?
Not to wiki that, but I know she's. And last thing I read that she was with Brian Henson. Okay. But she's doesn't really act anymore, I don't think.
She doesn't, and I think she was really popular from Ferris Bueller, right? So
yeah. She did an amazing job in Legend.
Yeah, in Legend.
Under Ridley Scott, and
always she has this very innocent look, and kind of immediately grow. You always kind of grow towards her in her movies, kind of care about her, and kind of get curious. And in this movie, spoiler alert, she will pass very soon. So you don't see that much of her, but she does a very good job with what she's given, I think. And I I don't think she's the best on-screen partner that Van Damme ever have. I will say that. The chemistry between them is a little bit flat.
Yes, it is. I mean, she's doing her best by sort of and how she. I think when I think she does a better job later on when the older,
Yes.
older Max Walker, can sort of.
I think
has to
that's
sort of,
I think that's her kink, right? So like she wants the
Yeah.
bad boy, and it's like, oh, I just had to die to get you out of that cage, didn't I? Yeah, I always felt like, I mean, there's a storyline reason here that she is actually pregnant and can't really share it with him yet, so she's conflicted and
because they've just moved into their property, haven't they? So
Yeah.
it's a bit sparse, isn't it?
Now,
They built it themselves, didn't they? I remember in the sort of flashback videotape, it sort of he gets like a model which they start building. Or
yeah,
something, doesn't it?
I find this weird because did he purposely make it to look like a raggedy 1920s like mansion?
Yeah,
Like it
doesn't
looks like
particularly
a
make sense.
scarecrow house, right? And like it doesn't look like it was built recently or anything. So it's like, did he model it to look old and decrepit, or did they like just get a model of the house because they're renovating it from because they got it cheap? I'm guessing that. Now I don't know how much we're going to talk about the real estate of the film moving forward, but
It's with this Peter Hyams sort of also a talented director who could also photograph his own movies.
Yeah.
And I think the unfortunate thing with TIMECOP is the nighttime scene, especially come the end, it's very difficult to make out what's going on outside when you see the flashes of lightning, which may be also the intent, but Peter is notorious for that. If you watch The Relic, the whole film, you can't really see what's going on.
he likes dark and blue, and this movie is very dark, and then it's blue.
Yeah.
So, but these bad guys, by the way, I forget their names.
One's got the best mullet or the worst mullet.
Yeah, is that the what's his name again?
But he's a stunt guy was also in like Rumble in the Bronx.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, his mullet in this movie is
It's atrocious.
it's timeless. I would say you can't even tell which timeline he's from because like that mullet doesn't exist in any era that I've been alive, at least.
I never saw it in 2004. That's for sure.
No, we are now in the year 2023.
Well, mullets are coming back now, Audi. And
Are
it's,
they? Is that why you have yours?
No, I don't have a mullet. But yeah, in Norwich, mullets are commonplace now,
I don't
which
know
is
if you could say
shocking.
that something that's like cool in Norwich really says it's back. I think Norwich is Norwich. I think most of Great Britain is just kind of like it's contained within Great Britain, at least fashion sense and food. You can keep that too. This
What?
explosion is fairly impressive, by the way. It's a pretty big explosion and all practical, obviously, because this was made in 1994.
I love that sort of zoom in on Van Damme, the music. It's like proper epic sort of sound.
My buddy always mentioned during that scene
Mm.
that he had a blood beard, because the blood is kind of weirdly applied to his face there, and it's definitely sticking out to his stubble.
Yeah. Also, you got the Universal backlot here.
Yeah, it's
it
very
may even
clearly
be,
the
it
Universal
may even be like the Warner Brothers backlot. I'm sure it's one or the other. But actually, it's interesting. The trailer for the movie sort of starts off with the classic Universal logo from like the 30s or something like that, and then it sort of goes through each logo till we get to one from the early 90s, and then they show you this kind of like 1920s kind of setting. The frame rate's all choppy, like it was back then. And it's a really clever way to sort of advertise the film, where the film starts out in a western sort of setting, and then we're having this kind of moment in the trailer where Van Damme walks, from the future to the past. That kind of weird, like at the time, quite novel visual effect. And you thought maybe they could have even started it out like with this instead of the other sequence, but I think the other one is such a quick way of getting across the concept of time travel very quickly. And I think that kind of works in its favour.
Yeah. I always liked this scene a lot, and this is kind of the first time we start seeing Van Damme in his actual character coming up here. And again, this concept of time travel just kind of... I like the fact that most of the time travel here is just shown for complete corruption of like the most expected kind, just like stocks and money and politics. There's very little. There's no stakes in like world destruction or anything here. It's just someone bad is going to become president if we don't stop this.
Yeah, yes. Yes, it's like the final outcome isn't particularly exciting on paper. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he's going to be president. You're like, oh, what? You know, you want someone who's going to make a weapon or something like that.
Well, I think they do a good job here of just kind of focusing a lot of the drama towards like Van Damme's character and his redemption, rather than like any kind of, because if it was made today, I'm sure there would be like a doomsday device somewhere in here.
Yeah, you have to up the stakes, wouldn't you?
It's like, it would be nice if I could save my wife, but also the atomic bomb is going to go off, and it's just you know, you pick one or the other, please.
It's like, there was 2 action movies, wasn't there, that sort of showed off the Sony minidisc, and this and Last Action Hero.
Yeah, which you mentioned earlier too. It just comes full circle, like just like he circles the stocks. I had him in disc player, and I really enjoyed that format. You know, bring it back.
I always thought they were too expensive at the time.
They were, but I
stuck with tape. You know,
it was a cool little device. It was like a PlayStation Portable in music form. I just love how he sticks out here by like putting his feet on the table, listening to this music, which doesn't really look like the type of music he would be listening to. I don't know what that means.
In the trailer, it's different. So they've got different licensed music, and I love how he sort of knows something's going to happen, because in the sound mix, it's kind of weird rumbling.
They got the CGI kind of water effect, which. What's the other movie that uses that? Is it T2? Where you get that, like...
Mate, it's exactly the same plugin type effect that you used in Highlander 3.
Oh, you're right.
Extended cut, the director's cut.
The Sorcerer.
Yeah. If that plugin was available for everyone, I think everyone would use it on YouTube.
I would still use it now, yeah. Every time I enter a Digital Foundry, I just come in from a time warp.
Boom, boom. There's Audi.
Yeah. So... I really like just this whole scene of contrast. I mean, I use that word a lot here, but that's kind of what the movie based itself on, with this fight scene coming up here with this old-timey boxer that puts his hands up. Yeah. And then Van Damme is just like, I saw Tyson do a knockout on TV.
Oh, right to the chest. Oosh.
But he doesn't do an uppercut.
No. Here we go this, and then stop, man. Flip. Yeah, he's got this sort of David Duchovny sort of mullet, hasn't he?
A nice axe kick there too. Van Damme mullets. I mean, that's a topic that goes near and dear to most of our hearts, right? And I think this mullet is 10 times superior to the Hard Target mullet.
Yeah, the Hard Target one's got the sort of greasy look, hasn't it? And
yeah, I don't like that look at all. But this one is pretty neat. He looks pretty good with this hair, and it's it's feathered and weathered. He's a man that's been through some stuff. But as a character, he just looks pretty good here, and again, with this weapon, I don't know what even this weapon is. It's not a grenade launcher. It's like a shotgun.
It's more of a shotgun, yeah. I think.
I mean, weapons people could probably tell is immediately like, oh, that's like a modified this or that. But that looks like a space gun to me, and that makes me wonder, because I think you can only travel back, and like you can travel back in time and come back to your current time, right? But they don't establish whether or not you can go forward in time. So it would have to be like a current day weapon, circa 1996.
He would have had to go back with it on his first trip. But yeah, because it's not like Terminator rules where you have to go back naked and stuff like that. You can go back with.
You mentioned that. I am shocked that Van Damme didn't put that in the script. It's like, no, I have to go naked. And then every time he went, you had to see his butt. That seems like a Van Damme thing to do, and I'm sure he fought for that. And it was like, my version of the movie would have been better. I would have been naked.
I don't know, if you saw that bit earlier when he comes like face on, you just want to see his junk swinging around.
Yeah, you would have to see it from behind all the time.
Chest up, yeah.
He doesn't really do the frontal part too much. Thank God.
I'm sure like Gene Siskel had moaned that there wasn't enough of Van Damme's bum in this film.
Is
Roger
that
Ebert
true?
was just like, what? Because I think his attitude was like, well, he's got a large female audience. Why don't you utilize that more?
Oh yeah, and he did. I mean, we laugh about it now, but there was a real female audience for this guy for most of the action heroes. I mean, they're not to fashion now. I understand. I think Van Damme, he's just a chiseled guy and he always looked good. But like the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and Sylvester Stallones are different. They're like bodybuilder types. But the female audience for Van Damme movies, I had to do some research on this when I did the commentaries for other publishers, and it was a real thing. And so he has a point. And in this movie, yeah, you see him mostly in his uniform. You don't really see him too much in his birthday suit. So I don't know if that's a complaint or not for people, but it was at the time, I guess.
And the interesting thing with the production design is, I suppose, with how it's been photographed, it very sort of has similar sort of visual tone to sort of visual kind of style to Outland with Sean Connery.
Yep.
Because it sort of carries over that smoky look with a lot of strong blacks, and I think it's sort of it could happily sort of fit within that sort of universe at an earlier time, but it's interesting. Sorry, that the punishment is just to send him back.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention. I always found this a little bit hokey in this movie about time travel and Van Damme doing the splits. Is this kind of form of punishment? It seems like the risk of this going wrong, of him either surviving that somehow and going to the hospital and then being in that time just doing havoc, or him landing on someone. There could have been someone in that car. I guess they can pinpoint whether or not there was, but it seems like just a bad plan. And also, it seems like a kind of weird system to have for them to come back to the current time and do a very quick case for him to be sentenced to death with those three judges, which we don't see again much.
No, we don't. I think also it may sort of carry over the sort of the swift decisions, like in 2000 AD.
Right. Yeah, this is a very Judge Dreddy kind of... I mean, Judge Dredd himself would kill him, but it is a very kind of 2080 idea of this kind of dystopian future. I mean, this was 1994, but I think the movies takes place in the futuristic year of 1996. So it was 2 years ahead, and I guess our society had just completely crumbled by that time. And we have secret underground judges that sentence you back in time to die.
But it still shows that there is a democracy, though, because there is, you can vote on who you want to be president, so there isn't this kind of iron fist kind of ruling over them. But
that is true.
But there is, I think, like dealing with when people who have abused time travel are just like given swift sort of decisions, like you're guilty, boom. If there's like any evidence that you've done anything, you're guilty.
Yeah, I think they established that there are three machines. There's this one, the TEC machine. There's Professor Clamp's prototype, which is what these guys are using, and then there's a third one. I think.
You think? I also thought there was this too.
I think there is a third one. Because
the prototype was supposed to be dismantled, but they discover that the prototype
maybe
still
I
exists.
remember wrong. Maybe it's a comic book thing, or maybe it's a sequel even that goes into this. There's a lot of TimeCOP out there for you guys to enjoy. But there's at least those two machines. And the Dr. Clamp stuff, we haven't even talked about this. So Dr. Clamp is a character that is referred to in this movie just by dialogue. But that is the creator of this time machine. And he's apparently, I think in the comic as well, he's kind of like a maniacal doctor kind of person that becomes the bad guy. And this is carried over to the video game, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But in this movie, you don't really see anything of him. You just hear of him. And I think that's I think they knew kind of to keep it focused on this rotten political stuff rather than bring in like this maniacal professor. Because like the video game stuff portrays him as like a Jim Carrey crazy man. And that would have absolutely taken you out of the movie. Yeah. Whereas here you have like the kind of both of these guys kind of understated and pointed. Like Van Damme has his melancholy, he has this inner turmoil, and Ron Silver has his plans, and you can kind of tell by their acting. They have kind of like more so than Mia Sara and Van Damme. I think Ron Silver and Van Damme have a good chemistry in this film.
Ron Silver plays it like he can't be touched. He's untouchable.
Yeah,
you can't.
He just knows what. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
kind of. He's a pretty good politician, I'd say. But yeah, you can just kind of tell that he's in full control of what he's doing. Yeah, he knows that Van Damme is kind of onto him, but as you say, he's untouchable. But I like the way that they act towards each other, that both of them know what individually they're doing and what they're up to.
Yes.
But they're not just straight up saying it like, I've got to get you. It's
because Van Damme's character is very much like he's like the police, so he can't say anything, he has to wait till he gets enough evidence, and the evidence is going to be like really risky because it's going to put him in danger or just like ruin his career or jeopardize the TEC.
Are you familiar with, because Sam Raimi is one of the producers here, are you familiar with kind of what his involvement was?
Well, not particularly. To a sort of degree that he had, this working relationship with Universal Pictures down to Darkman, and he'd wanted to sort of, he saw, I think he had maybe seen like a preview cut of Lionheart, and that sort of got him interested in sort of working with Van Damme, and that sort of developed into Hard Target, and then I think, I presume, the continued relationship sort of continued over the TIMECOP, but that was kind of the last thing Raimi did under that sort of label, I think, maybe.
Because I wouldn't say that this movie has much of Raimi's DNA. Maybe a little bit of the characterizations, but other than that, other than his producer credit, I wouldn't really say. I'm not a huge Raimi guy anyway, so maybe I'm wrong, and there are other people I can pinpoint what his influence would have been.
If you look at some more of the sort of his later movies, you may see some sort of influence, but I think he was maybe very much just like making sure the production ran smoothly.
Yeah.
And wasn't really there to sort of offer much creative input. Perhaps he had, he's explored it a little bit more in interviews, but I think it was very much, it seems like a bit more hands-off on this.
I mean, some of the humor and some of the characterizations on the bad guys, I would say, kind of shows a little bit of Raimi influence, maybe. Just kind of mentioned like Darkman and stuff. And I will say there are some similarities between Darkman and this film and how it's portrayed and how, especially on the bad guy side, the kind of smarmy kind of, in Darkman it's mostly mobsters and here's politicians. But what's the difference, right?
Yeah, you could say the mobsters, the sort of the bad guys and their thugs. The thugs sort of carry over from Darkman.
Yeah, so maybe something like this kind of shows some influences. But I always forget he's involved in this movie, and I think when doing research for this is like his name comes up a lot more than I think it necessarily should, because he is very much just a producer, like you mentioned. And unless there is stories out there I'm not aware of, it doesn't seem like there was much Sam Raimi on set even. I think he just liked the story and kind of got involved from there. And at this time he was really into the idea of doing comic book movies, and I don't know if he ever ended up doing one. Maybe Spider-Man?
Well, yeah, he always wanted to do The Shadow, and I
right.
think he still retains the rights to do that, but he's done nothing with it. And he's a bit like Dick Tracy, with Warren Beatty, who just has got this property, he still owns it, and he's doing nothing with it. He hasn't hasn't re-released it, whatever.
I'm one of those weirdos that really like The Shadow, the movie that came out in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
I think
loads of good stuff in it, but it's let down by lack of action. And
the action isn't great, but man, do I love the production design and the performances.
The score by Goldsmith. Yeah.
There's this podcast out there called How Did This Get Made, and they did an episode on it, and I couldn't believe just like how wrong they were in their takes on it. It's like they didn't pay attention even, and that from there it's been kind of like an effect. This happens a lot with that podcast because one of my favorite movies is Drop Dead Fred, and that movie was also featured on that podcast, and from there there's this ripple effect of people who never watched those movies saying, oh no, it's really bad because of this and that. It's like, but that's completely wrong. You didn't even get it. I was like, I never saw it. I just heard
Well, the Americans don't like Drop Dead Fred, but the British do, because was Rick Mayall.
Rick
We
Mayall,
grew up
yeah.
with Rick Mayall. So
Rest
also
in
another
peace.
an issue with TimeCop is weirdly all the other cars seem kind of normal in the future, but apparently TEC and the politicians drive around these giant cars that look like dishwashers.
Those cars are not cool. Like, you watch RoboCop and stuff. Those cars are cool, but here, it literally looks like they just dumped like a playset on top of a regular car.
Yeah, it is like something out of like it's like a thrown away design from the TV cartoon show Mask, and I think conceptual designs of this was Sid Mead, wasn't it? Yeah, it's just like I dropped the ball on this.
I think he gave them some leftovers from like a bad 70s sci-fi movie.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it's the production like with the houses, his apartment and TEC headquarters is really well done. I think there's thoughts gone into that, but the cars though, good.
But
Lord.
it's weird because you look at all these other things, and it's all based in it's rooted in kind of as like contemporary designs just expanded. So it became like here you see a widescreen TV. You also see a water station.
It's supposed to imply the water's not very good.
Yeah, I guess so. They have a water cooler in your living room, but whatever. But you see like a widescreen design, which is what norm now. We don't really build them into the wall so much, but gotta get what it takes. And then it's generally fine. The TC headquarters also fairly fine. It's just a basement. You can tell that's slightly futuristic because they have a lot of monitors. So like there's technology there, but it's it feels like something that was repurposed quickly to make this police department, and they're slightly underfunded, and you get all these ideas from the production design. Then you look at those cars, and it's just like, what's up with that car? Like it doesn't fit in with the world it's around. It makes no logical sense because when he gets into the car, there's so much technology on it, but all he says is "Let's go home," and it just takes you home. Feels like a regular GPS could do that, even in the year of 1996.
If you see there the window where the light was coming in, you can sort of see this very Blade Runner-esque, was kind of it's like building upon the buildings. You know what I mean? That sort of retrofitted kind of stuff outside. But you don't really get to see his exterior of his house or his apartment. And coming up now is we've got thankfully to sort of throw in some action, and because Ron Silver's character's obviously clocked on to Van Damme knows too much.
Right. And they use these tasers, which I always liked this weapon. Little
12,000 volts, motherfucker. It's like,
yeah, and this is definitely a scene that was written specifically for Van Damme, especially the end, which is just an awesome. Oh yeah, awesome.
Again, another sort of trailer fodder shot. And it's like this is was this around the same time as Under Siege? Because we get to see a very sort of close up sort of knife fight, which is not particularly effective as in Under Siege. Under Siege does it.
No, Van Damme is not the same knife fighter as Mr. Seagal, I guess, but because Van Damme literally just puts his arm up, puts his arm down, puts his arm up, puts his arm down, and then swings. So, there's very little technique, like a Filipino knife fight, but it's effective. I mean, the knife fight in Under Siege I find ridiculous.
You've just been woken up, so you're not going to do much. Really, you always to be stuck together.
Right, you're right. How could I doubt Van Damme's knife skills? I always found this jump kick there, kind of the spinning roundhouse kick, slightly weird. I think they're using wires, and it's either the ceiling is too low or something. There's something awkward about how he elevates from the floor.
But he does an interesting thing there where he grabs a sort of shirt to wrap around the guy, then he wraps his leg over and kicks him. So it's kind of that's a very Jackie Chan sort of technique.
Yeah. And this would have been a time where Van Damme was definitely studying a lot more Hong Kong action stuff, because shortly after this he would be working with Ringo Lam. He would go work with on the what's it called, Knockoff and these kind of movies in Hong Kong. So he was definitely expanding his horizon a little bit. This is a great shot there, yeah.
It's a shame you don't actually get to see him throw the guy out his front door. You want to sort of see him do a great kick him.
Yeah, I think it's more effective that you just kind of see from outside the door than this.
Shows his strength,
then, you have this character
thrown
here.
a grown-ass man through a door.
Yeah. Yeah, this is our introduction to kind of temporary sidekick.
Yeah, yeah, and also we've seen now, like the sort of corridor of these apartments. Very feels like he's living in a place from the 1940s. How you sort of enter the room, and you've got this kind of technologies. There's this, I suppose, with the contrast of sort of the emphasis of time travel and the past and the future, and how they sort of meld together.
Zone 7, it says there. So
Yeah,
I guess they are in some sort of safety zones, or it's just a zone. Maybe I'm looking too much into it. Man, do they get a lot of value out of this set though? The TEC set. Yeah. A lot of the movie takes place in these dark hallways and offices, but there's enough lights and screens to make it interesting. So it's not a bad set. Yeah.
Well, at the time, it sort of made a change for what we're seeing with Van Damme films, because a lot of the time it was just like a very sort of simple, sort of two-dimensional character he'd be playing, and it's fine because you're just watching it for the action. And then we sort of see this sort of transition with like Abel or Lionheart, and then Nowhere to Run, and then with this we're seeing more character-driven performances from him, and you can see that he's really sort of trying to sort of broaden his range. And with this, I remember as a kid going into it, I think, it wasn't that much sort of high-flying kicks from Van Damme. You get a few sort of couple of set pieces, but it's more about, Van Damme dealing with this sort of political sort of scenario he's put in, and deciding for himself that he's actually going to correct time.
Well, I think a lot of the fighting in this movie is internal with Van Damme, and I think he does. This is the beginning of Van Damme finding himself better as an actor, right? And we've talked about this in our previous commentaries of how like Van Damme is extremely good at just kind of emoting, and definitely like his eyes and the vulnerability that he's able to get through is leagues ahead of what his contemporaries could do, like the Stallones and the Arnolds, certainly the Seagals who can't emote for shit. Here Van Damme,
that's not with his eyes.
He's an interesting character, and he does an interesting performance. So I think he definitely got through better with this movie than most of others of this era. I think later on there's like jcvd and things like that, but this is a movie that definitely proved that he wasn't just a guy that could kick and look good. He could act. He can't act any role. You can't put him in any role, but you can put him in specific roles with some depth, and he will actually perform to service and make a very interesting film. And I think it's too bad that this was also the height of his issues, his personal issues, and I think that affected his ability to get cast in roles like this. But I watch this movie now, and if I wasn't a Van Damme fan already, I would be kind of wondering what happened to this guy. Why didn't he go on to do a lot bigger stuff on the in cinema rather than just direct to video? And there's many reasons for that, obviously, we can talk about. But, this movie is definitely a showcase for his talents beyond his martial arts.
Well, I think it's the same with a lot of the... I think Stallone, he was a director, so he knows what he's doing. But I think with Arnold and Van Damme, once you put them with good directors, they can always, the actors always deliver.
Yeah, I mean, both Stallone and Arnold are better actors than they're given credit for. I think just emoting is where, because you look at something like In the Days, which isn't necessarily a good directed movie either, but it's something where Arnold tried to show range, and he does fine, but there is a limitation to it. And Stallone as well. You can watch the Rocky stuff, and it's specifically Rocky. But I find it often very troublesome to kind of care about Stallone, and maybe that's
Copland. I think it would be a better example. Yeah,
Copland.
That's like 20 years later.
Yeah.
From Rocky to that.
And that, because at that point their muscles are starting to sag, and they're older, more vulnerable people. So I think we just also genetically just respond differently to them. So I think, Copland is great, and he does a great performance in it. But at this time, 1994, if you watched Demolition Man, if you watched, I guess, Eraser eventually with Arnold, because I don't think he was doing action at this time.
It was True Lies we had this
True
year.
Lies, yeah, which, it's more of a comedy, action comedy, but, he plays that very straight. But I think the range that Van Damme shows here is a little bit more impressive and shows a lot more upside that he didn't get to show until, like, Wake of Death and JCVD in these movies. I always liked the scene with what's her name, Gloria Rubin here, being so nervous, and Van Damme just chewing gum and talking.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what happened to those twins? So, like, see those two spots over there? And it's like, oh, very reassuring. This also confuses me a little bit, though, and I forget if this is explained in the comic book, but this pod, we see them go in this pod. Yeah, they go in this pod into the vortex, but when they come out on the other side, that pod is always gone. So that material must be disintegrated and just gone at some point there.
Well, I always sort of implied that it sort of reaches the point and then it stops, but they get thrown a kind of like just teleported, and then when you go back in, Back to the Future, you return in the vehicle. So yeah, when you think about it, it really does like make no sense, and that's the thing, as you mentioned at the start, sort of the time travel is kind of silly. I think Back to the Future is probably always going to be the one that sort of gets it kind of right, but these but in terms of, like, if you think about all these time travel movies, and in TIMECOP itself has sort of become part of pop culture with that sort of the concept of time, because I make fun of it in South Park. They bring it up in Avengers Endgame. We see just listing off time travel movies, and I always have it in South Park where it's the Walmart episode, and you can get like 3 copies of TIMECOP for like a discount price. And I think Carl's like, "Why do I want 3 copies of TIMECOP?"
Yeah, like, because you see the pod actually leave in that scene, so they must be in some sort of state where that disappears, or they're, as you said, they're thrown dimensionally into something and then come out on the other side, and that material just disappears. But it's never fully explained what happens. And when they come back, they do come back in the pod, like you mentioned. So it's like, how does this work? But it's better that they don't explain, because if they started explaining it, I think that would just slow the movie down and be kind of like, you start thinking too much about it. And the thing about time travel is you don't explain it. You only say what happens, and you see that on screen, and that's all we need.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah. I love the little device he's got, the tracking device, which is kind of like, sat-nav sort of thing, or like a, Google Maps thing.
Yeah.
And, it's supposed to Apple Newton. It's like, beat up Martin. Eat up Martha.
I think one of the issues, too, here, when we started to the time travel stuff here, is that in the beginning we go to the Civil War and things like that, but we don't really go to an interesting. We only go back to 1994 at this point, which is like,
yeah, outside of the Wall Street sequence.
Yeah, the Wall Street sequence.
They don't really have fun with the concept. That's the thing.
And I think that was. I think there were sequels planned for this. There was a sequel, but not on Van Damme. But I think at the time this was shot, there were plans for sequels, and I think that's where we would have seen more of, like, the time travel aspect gets expanded upon further, like going to other times. So, I don't know.
It's weird that they didn't follow up with sequels, because obviously, as we mentioned, that the box office was very good. It would have been a big hit on video, and it's still, considered one of Van Damme's most popular films, especially, I think, with a sort of general audience as well. I think the thought of doing a sequel just would seem like logical, but I think maybe down to Van Damme's schedule, because he just started, he started quite a lot of movies sort of started doing that around this period. Maybe just wasn't there to sort of do it, or maybe they thought, it had a start, middle, and end, and that was kind of it, and they didn't see the idea of pursuing it.
I don't think Van Damme himself, and maybe his agent, was too into sequels.
Yeah, I've read about that.
Yeah, and that's something that's changed in the later years, because he was fighting for that Bloodsport sequel for years. It's kind of, like, if you watch that Behind the Closed Doors with Van Damme TV series, you can see that they're working on a new Kickboxer, which eventually would happen, but not the one he was fighting for. And then Bloodsport 2, like the real Bloodsport 2, because apparently he wasn't very happy with the Daniel Bernhardt ones.
Oh, the Albert Pien movie, wasn't it? Well, no, that's Kickboxer, maybe, wasn't it? He did Albert Pien.
Albert Pien did Kickboxer. And then, but the Bloodsport ones, I forget who directs them, but it's with Daniel Bernhardt, who nowadays is very successful with the stunt group from John Wick. So did good for himself.
I suppose it come like 1999, where he, okay, his career on the big screen is sort of plummeting. Let's return to something that was popular. That was Universal Soldier, and that sort of again did more damage to him. And but I suppose he chose the wrong sequel.
Yeah. This is a neat scene too, where he meets his younger, more naive self. Where he was just a corrupt politician, but not like a mean politician.
Just lay off the fucking candy bars.
Yeah, you're making me fat. I really like, man. His performance is so good, and he's chewing the scenery a bit, but man, as he should, because he makes the movie. Sadly passed though, didn't he? Ron Silver passed like 2009,
he did.
Didn't he?
Yes, it's such a shame. It's weirdly that my boss, when I used to work as a projectionist for Cineworld, he looked kind of like Ron Silver. I never got to tell him that. He may have found it amusing, or might have been offended by it. I would know his kind of reaction.
Yeah. Also, another kind of weirdness here is that he brought 4 people with him. He's the 5th. The pod only has space for 2. So I don't know if they did like 3 trips and then timed those trips.
Yeah,
like,
there you go, Audi. You're picking holes in it. You're ruining the movie.
Yeah, I know. I shouldn't.
Stop trying to make sense of it all. Yeah. This film lacks logic, all right?
It's still the most awesome time travel movie ever, except for Back to the Future.
It's up there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty well done. But I always found that kind of funny, because I remember the first time I watched this in the cinema, because I got to see this in the theaters. And
what?
Yeah, I did.
So you're same age as me. How the hell?
Oh, dude, I come from a small town in Norway, and the people who ran our cinema didn't care. I got to see a lot of R-rated stuff.
I mean, this film really should be classified as 15. Really, it's pretty.
The British, the BBFC or whatever.
Yeah.
That should be a 15. I think it was an 18 though, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. A lot of Van Dammes were still 18. Like Sudden Death was an 18. It's ridiculous.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. When the Ninja Turtles movie came out in 1990, it was 18 here in Norway.
What?
I got to go see it, but
because
it
the
was
nunchucks,
18.
right?
No, it was just classified 18. I think because of the weapons and the fighting.
That's mad. It's aimed at kids so they can't see it. So the next Disney film coming out in Norway is 18 rated. You're like, what the hell? It's like...
One funny thing about TIMECOP in Norway, I think I told the story before, at least to you, but we had a short-lived show. So we have a TV channel called TV3. For any Norwegians out there listening to this commentary, they'll be very excited right now. We have a show. We have a TV show on TV3 at the time called the You Choose to Film, or You Choose to Movie, and it was right as cell phones had come out, so you could text like a number with like just a string of text, and you could vote for a movie on Friday. So the vote started on Monday, and then there would be TV commercials running, and there would always be 2 movies. And the first episode of that show had Pretty Woman and TIMECOP, and me and my friend spent so much of our parents' money making sure that TIMECOP won. And then finally the show came on air, had a presenter on a white background, like, we're going to tally the counts now. And it was like 96% wanted to see TIMECOP. And we were just like, yeah! And then my buddy's mom looked at us and was like, couldn't you guys just go down and rent it at the rental place? And we looked at each other. It's like, God damn it. We spent like $30 on this. So kind of flawed concept from that point. But that's always been my TIMECOP story here, was that we did get to watch TIMECOP that night, not Pretty Woman. But she was absolutely right. We could just have gone and rented it for a quarter of the price and watched it several times.
I think even when this came out, it didn't have, like, the VHS didn't have the big box, like Star VHS. It was just a very much a retail version when they put it out. I was just like, no, I wanted a big box TIMECOP, when the video store eventually closed. And
Yeah, this movie's distribution has been fairly bare bones since its inception. It's it had a theatrical run. It's been released on DVD, and
weirdly had a combo thing with
Bloodsport.
Yeah, of all things, because they weren't under the same label
Both
either. So.
terrible transfers, by the way. The Bloodsport transfer on that Blu-ray is among the worst I've ever seen. Now we live in the world where Bloodsport is on 4K,
which is amazing
from Tape Light, and it's real good. So I'm kind of hoping that we get the same for TIMECOP. We are getting Sudden Death, as you mentioned.
There's Pete Hymes there with his cameo.
Oh yeah,
playing it by the other thugs. Yeah, weird, isn't it?
I like how he set the movie in locations where you can definitely tell that like he's having fun with lighting. Like the TEC offices is very much just like Peter Hymes' like wet dream. It's just like shadows and strobe lights from the monitors like everywhere. It's just like you can just tell that he's having a grand old time in this movie, and they really liked each other. And I think now like his son has been doing movies with Van Damme, right? So
he did the two sort of modern sequels with
Universal Soldier.
Yeah, but the last one they did, which had Scott Adkins in,
the Reckoning or whatever.
He didn't like that film. Yeah, it was a shame. The fighting is amazing, but the film just sucks. I thought.
Yeah, that's a pretty neat effect, by the way, when he gets a scar.
Oh yeah. It's always interesting when you look at movies from the '90s, the mid-'90s period in high definition, when you see, because at the time rendering CGI was a 2K max. They couldn't go beyond that, and you can see the sort of film stock slightly change its grading when it goes to a CG effect. It's very, very prevalent actually in Jurassic Park. And watch like Last Action Hero in 4K, you can see literally when an effect shot's going to happen because the grading shifts.
Yep, shifts a lot. This the fog here shooting there, it kind of looks like someone that would be your big brother or something. There's just something. There's some similarity there.
He's gonna get his arm frozen, isn't he?
Yes, and he just decided to, like, when you see that, pay attention to it, because he just decided to make that scene his, because he will like shake his fists at the sky and be all like animated. I always found that reaction really funny, because like he frees his arm and kicks it to pieces. Pretty neat scene. It's very much out like the Friday the 13th or something. Lay off the candy bars.
This is a good sequence. As I mentioned earlier, we see the grading shift, but it's very clever how he drops stiletto into his hand. It's a very good split.
It's very good camera work. But yeah, you see, I think it's soon where you see that ice scene. Just pay attention to the thug, because like he will absolutely choose the scene.
Yeah. It's a proper Mortal Kombat fatality.
Yeah, just like, man, he knew his assignment and he did it. So, yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the bigger action set pieces of the film until the very ending. You don't really get too much of this. And it's very much like a cat and mouse, bang, bang, shoot, hide. There's not much of a fight here. But it's still very well shot and it's very cool. So again, it just shows the strengths of Van Damme, that you kind of care about his character enough that you don't have to think too much about the fact that he's not kicking.
It's a time when everyone's kind of action movies were somewhat, the idea of freezing someone was quite cool, thanks to Terminator 2. You know?
Yeah. I mean, that's why Sub-Zero was a huge character in Mortal Kombat 2. Look at that. Just look at him now.
Have a nice day.
And he just shakes his fist at the clouds there.
Yeah, curses.
He kicked my arm off. And then a very, very nice dummy shot there with the split legs and everything. That sequence is just amazing. I love it. And then we're heading into this scene now with the kind of a switcheroo, right? With the
does she? Yeah, because obviously she's already been won over by what he's going to introduce in terms of his policies as president, so it's going to benefit her and her family. And it's weird that she's like, her political views are really driving her to sort of like turn against Van Damme. You'd have to be a bit of a political nut to do that, you know.
Hey, they exist. Maybe,
of course,
considering the times we're living, it's probably.
It seems like you know, turn against her colleagues so quickly. But
I think
for a guy, she doesn't really know, like Ron Silver's character, where she's already seen him kill someone. It's like, how can you trust this guy?
It's. I think the problem with her character, because the actress Gloria Rubin, she was in ER. My mom used to watch that, so I'm very familiar with her, and she's a very good actress. But in this film, she's not given a lot, and she's given too little too late. You know, it's like she comes into the movie here in this act, and as you said, like, I don't find the backstab that interesting because we don't know her other than like her boyfriend is about to like ask her out to a prom, or I forget what the thing is. It's like they include a little bit of a personal touch there, and it's like, okay, so we know something, but for her and Van Damme to have any sort of like rapport by this time is like they've literally only walked a warehouse together, and that's it.
Yeah, the weird thing is, you know, this movie runs at an hour 38, right? So it's a very tight action movie, which is what you want for an action film.
Right.
I don't think they should. I mean, I love John Wick 4, but it is too long. But in the case of this, all the press photos I've seen and anything in terms of trailers and teasers that have been put across the world, I've never actually seen much that's been deleted from the movie, because often the case, they often use deleted scenes in trailers, as we all know, and you think, oh, where's that from? But in the case of this, you think, okay, maybe her character's been cut down a bit in the edit, but there's nothing we've seen photographs wise to imply that. Maybe there's some sort of fan site to TimeCop that's got something I've not seen.
There's probably some time coppers out there that though. I don't get the sense that too much has been cut from the film. I don't think there's too much. As you said, I've never really gotten the sense that there's too much cut here. I think the script was very straightforward and very clean. I think they shot most of what they wanted to shoot, and the lead scenes that were, I don't think, are very interesting, if any. So, I mean, there's obviously deleted scenes. There always is, for time and other purposes. But I always wondered about this as well, how, like, because here so much has changed from that little change that Ron Silver does. But they never really established whether or not there's been incidents like this where, like, there has been, like, a major change in the timelines, because Van Damme here seems fairly surprised. So,
yeah, for sure. I mean, and for them to be sort of also like curious as to why he's come back and everything's, you know, he's all freaking out. I think, okay, there would be protocols in place to sort of say, okay,
right.
You got to speak to the psychiatrist or the TEC or something, you know.
But then again, I mean, now that McComb or Ron Silver has kind of changed timeline and he's been in charge of everything, maybe he's put the safe things in there to make sure that they aren't that prepared or aren't that aware of these repercussions. So maybe it's just like, maybe it makes sense from that standpoint that like these guys' job isn't the same as what they were in the timeline we saw earlier.
Or maybe the TEC was so good at their job, this never happened.
Maybe. But even here, you know, what's his name?
The nerdy guy.
Matusak? No, the big guy.
Matusak. Yes, Matusak.
Yeah, Matusak. Yeah, I mean, he's supposed to be Van Damme's best friend, kind of, and like they have this relationship, and now they don't have anything, and it's just kind of like, well, how? Why did there's? I'm not gonna try and make sense of this.
But also, we see that the nerdy guy, the tech guy, he's like a little bit more sort of like, you know.
And now he's because he was watching VR porn earlier.
Yeah. So he's a lot more like, he's a professional, you know.
Yeah, now
he takes his job seriously.
He still has a long hair and beard though. Like,
yeah,
he's still,
yeah.
You know. So he's
I love the guy. These little moments here of Ron Silver where he offers the guy the peanut. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
last time I started bleeding from it, so like, yeah, these little touches are pretty fun. I was seeing, speaking of the VR nude scene, we didn't talk enough about that. Fans are out there just raging at the screen right now. How could we not? I was reading very quickly, like, trivia on IMDb, and there's not much for this movie. But the one thing that is there is that the virtual reality nude scene was originally supposed to be a nature documentary about beavers. However, the off-site film team got drunk on the evening of shooting and ended up at a strip bar. The next morning, they woke up realizing they had missed the bus to the nature reserve and had to instead film one of the dancers they had met at the club the night before. This doesn't sound true.
That sounds so weird and offbeat. Like,
why would he be watching a nature film about beavers in VR?
That's mad.
Like, it doesn't make any sense even in, like, context of the film. Unless that's, I mean, I'm not kink shaming. But, I mean,
But
one way or another,
the
he's
character's
watching
totally
beavers.
written to be like this kind of perv, isn't he? Really?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You know, a tech guy would have all this stuff, you know. And,
I'm just wondering where this trivia comes from, because there has to be some truth to it. So someone, I don't know, if anyone out there worked on TimeCop and can confirm the beaver story, please send us a letter at the TimeCop commentary, in Norwich.
P.O. box, you know.
Yeah, P.O. box. But yeah, so I here also, like, I guess the character has been maintained even though the timeline has changed, right? So Matusek sees the integrity and decides to help, seeing that something's off, and is willing to die for it in this timeline. It's very quick. I kind of wish we kind of got out of this location for a few minutes so we could just see the world.
Yeah.
Right.
It'd be great if he went back and it was like the Back to the Future 2 world, you know, where everything's like kind of fucked, and it's like, or even more of a sort of a world of 2000 AD where it's very much like ruled by one person or something like that, you know.
Or even just like a RoboCop kind of thing where you see like some of the presidential campaign videos for Ron Silver. And then,
proper
like,
satire stuff, you know.
Right, yeah.
Look at that.
That's a great shot, by the way.
It's iconic. But if you see it in HD, you know, when he sits up, you can see the map, the sort of compositing
very
line.
much so.
It's all a bit wobbly woo.
That seems like something that was also shot after. I think that was an insert shot, just kind of like maybe it wasn't scripted or something, but it seems like his hair is very different, and also he's just kind of in nowhere's land. It doesn't really fit in with anything else shot. So I don't know if that was like a pickup shot later on because they felt like they needed something to have him be at this location.
Oh yeah, and straight away he's put into danger. You know,
right away.
That shows you just sort of like, wow, as we saw earlier, where they're just literally thrown into the river. But there was a sense of like major risk when you sort of go back in time where you're plopped, you know, and you don't know where you're gonna be. You could find yourself like in a furnace. Okay, you know, oh, I'm dead. Oh, it's dead. Shit.
Jane Doe. Yeah. I mean, this is where you get to see kind of glorious.
This always made me laugh though, because she like Van Damme looks totally confused because she's been given this kind of like I don't know, overdose or morphine or something, and she's like, security. Just like I'll just like quickly just roundhouse kick her, kick her out. Quiet you. Like,
yeah, these things are nice. Let's talk about something that's not so nice, the video game. Because we haven't talked about that too much. So we mentioned, right, that this movie co-produced with JVC and Dark Horse, and the idea for it very much, because I've spoken to, so many years ago I interviewed people from Creo in France, Creo Interactive. They'd made Dune, the old adventure game, Lost Eden. They were a French company that specialized in these kind of big adventure titles.
Didn't they do Mega Race on a 3DO?
Yes. So this kind of like video-based adventure game was their specialty, and they had their own technology of digitizing graphics, and fairly ahead of their time, and not a bad developer by any means, but someone that specialized very much in a genre and defined that. And they were looking to expand into the console market and looking for properties, very much like Ocean Software and these kinds of places, and landed on TimeCop. And the idea, I think, I spoke with a guy called Eugene, Emmanuel, back in the day, about this from Creo. And there were some ideas. There was going to be a PC kind of adventure game, which never came, like they never started even development on that. But like I mentioned, that was kind of their bread and butter. And so there was going to be some sort of like time travel adventure game, which would have been very interesting to see, considering if you've seen like Dune. They're very good, those games. Very well written. And would have been interesting to see their take on it. But what they did end up developing was TimeCop on Super Nintendo, which was released in PAL territories, US and Japan. and kind of famous for its box art in the U.S. and Japan using the first panel of the comic book as its cover art. So it's actually more based on the comic book in terms of the fact that you're fighting Dr. Clamp and going through history. So you're going to like old-timey U.S., like Depression era and the future and underwater and things like this.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it's a very different concept and very silly. That game is one of the worst games ever made, which people probably know. Often stated that Van Damme did the digitized graphics on it, the motion cap. He did not. It was actually just a martial artist down in France that kind of looked like him. So it is not a Van Damme digitized fighter. Street Fighter the movie still has that glorious credit.
The game plays so bad. It's very clunky. It's
awful,
very sort of jumps really high, and it's very difficult to time your attacks. And
the attacks have way too much lead up time. So that was the problem with a lot of in the aftermath of Mortal Kombat, kind of popularizing that kind of graphic style, was that people didn't understand that Mortal Kombat's perfection was keyframes. So there's not many frames of animation in Mortal Kombat. But what they do is that they have iconic keyframes, meaning like kind of the frame that it stills on, or the kind of main frame of the animation. The high kicks, the low kicks, the punches are very straight and iconic. Kind of like which is something that Van Damme himself probably would have specialized in, because he on cinema. That's kind of his trademark as well. It's just very iconic straight kicks, high, straight, and good keyframes. But a lot of these other developers, including Creo, kind of filmed a lot of animation frames and included all of it to create smooth motion, like movie motion.
It's just overly animated, wasn't it?
Yeah, overly animated, and then, as you said, it's hard to time your attacks because the actual impact of the kick comes, 1.5 seconds after pushing the button. And most other enemies have projectiles and very instant attacks.
Yeah, and their attacks are really goofy as well. They're just like
they're terrible, very stiff, and they all walk like robots. And it's clear that like they were just using random actors that were not really tuned into what they were doing. So they're asked like walk, and then they walk like John Cleese in Monty Python.
Yeah, and it also demonstrates that the developers didn't really have much of a hand on platforming and things like that. It's very you have to sort of get it right to sort of make the game work successfully. And I remember they were going to do a Mega CD one, which was actually finished, wasn't it? But it just didn't get published.
Yeah, so the Mega CD version is interesting because it was released as a demo. So you had like I think the demo is actually of the last boss, believe it or not. So that's always a good thing. But the full game was leaked 10 years ago, I think. So you can now enjoy TIMECOP on Sega CD if you so will. It's the same game. There's not much in the ways of differences. I think I saw like some animation frames were different when I was comparing them.
There's some like additional FMV cutscenes,
worse colors. Yeah, so they do use some FMV scenes from the movie, like really grainy. But yeah, it's an interesting product of like mixing these influences because it's based on the comic. The visual style is based on the film, and it lands in this no man's land. And it's clear when I was talking to them, this is many years ago now, but I had a phone call and just kind of talking about the creation of the game. And it was very difficult. They had crunch and they didn't have access to Van Damme, and the game was very much heavily tied to him. So it's like we still have to kind of promote it as if he's in the game, but he's not. So Van Damme himself wouldn't be promoting it because he was out there promoting Street Fighter. So there's all these issues, and they were just talking about all these ideas they had for the game to be better. They were talking to me about how it's going to have like a kind of rail shooter stage, and like it was going to be like a mixed genre game, which was very big in Europe at the time.
Well, it's the same issue they had with the Congo video game, which was going to be a mix of different things. It just turned out to be an absolute mess.
I mean, that's what they always like. That's a holdover from the microcomputer era, where
the Ocean software,
it was a way to give more bang for your buck. It's like, hey, this is a shooting game, it's an action game, and it's a racing game all in one because it has a stage for each. None of them are good, but you're still getting 3 games in one. And that was a very European way of dealing, especially with movie licenses, just kind of giving more value. And TimeCop was going to be the same.
And go back to the film. Obviously we now know that Max Walker has an incentive to save his wife because she's pregnant, and when he sort of says goodbye to her, to sort of get into position, as it were, to sort of meet the younger version, you see sort of the Paul Rudd version of like Van Damme sort of like strut past, and it's a great camera move. It just sort of pulls in on Van Damme, where you're sort of rooting more for the older Van Damme than the younger one, which is kind of weird because it's the same character, but.
Yeah, but we spent more time with the older one. We understand the pain he has right now. And again, look at that shot of him. You're talking about like how you have like this kind of goofy Paul Ruddish, boyish Van Damme, and then you have the older one, and it's perfectly illustrated.
Yeah, it does.
It's well acted.
Yeah.
So again, the strengths of Van Damme here. And
all the clocks. It's like
yeah,
symbolism, as it were.
Are you saying that the movie is about time?
It's about men on rollerblades with parrots on their shoulder or something. I don't know.
He's like just standing there. He's like, man, I was hokey back then.
You'd be like, God, I was a prick.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed. I kind of wish I died instead.
I think most people probably see themselves, if they saw yourself in the flesh like 10 years earlier, they think, oh God, I was a bit of a knob.
Oh yeah, it would be awful.
What was I doing?
Yeah. That's why social media exists now. It's just to have gotchas on us from 10 years ago. Yeah, he's such a slime ball here, and I like the fact that he's not growing into being this slime ball.
Yeah, he's sort of being, sort of leading her on to a certain degree, and sort of saying,
because he saw how much he was ruling in the future, right? And it's just like, I don't need to be nice to people anymore. I don't need to like suck up, and it's just this little character twist there. It's nice. It's good details here. So, man, they cut the scene too early here. Like too late. I mean, it's like could have seen his butt one more time.
It was quite a hard cut. You think there may have actually been more stuff there, but
I wonder if it's a little bit of a weird one. I wonder if they were meant to reshoot that with like her Sarah. What's her name again? Mia Sarah.
Mia Sarah.
Kind of redoing the scene from a different point of view at that point, because now she's seen the older one, and it's like, well, I like you much more than this weirdo in my bed right now.
Yeah, you could have had like maybe with the editor, if they've done a 2-camera setup, just use camera B to sort of show, it looks slightly different,
Right. I love the lighting. You were saying it's very dark here, but like this shot is awesome.
Oh, it's wonderfully shot here. But once he steps outside and he's like in the attic and stuff like that, it's very difficult to sort of make out what's happening.
Yeah, and, you're absolutely right with that. And out in the rain later on, it turns a bit into a mess.
Which is very uncommon for films at this period, because they'd always light it nighttime scenes quite well, so you can actually see what the hell's going on. With modern movies, It's become an absolute nightmare, and especially if you watch something on Disney Plus and HDR, the black levels are just terrible, and you can't see anything. You think, oh my God, they've got the exposure like really, really low down. I can't see what's happening.
Van Damme here in the uniform. Another kind of waste opportunity. I wish we saw him a little bit more in the uniform, because he looks good in it. And it would have just been kind of interesting to see how he was as a cop.
Yeah, for sure.
Just out on assignment, and like, because I'm guessing you could have kind of contrasted that a bit with Ron Silver character being kind of like a suck up and like this gutless politician, and then you have him as a cop, like very naive and just like a go-getter, like just like trying to make the world a better place.
I love the bit there when he goes through the door and he grabs the gun, and the guy goes, "Who the fuck are you?"
Yeah,
love it. Absolutely love it.
Man, the hairstyle on that other guy, not the old man, but the other one, he has a very unfortunate hairline situation.
Oh, he does, it's receded across the song.
Receded is not even the word. I think it's just like it's left the planet.
It's just buggered off.
Yeah, it's somewhere else. It's in a different timeline. You think that he went back in time and just like, hey, just shave your head.
I think it's a sort of. I think they've actually just kind of cut it back to sort of show, like in the future, they just have shit hair, but sort of make them look kind of uniquely weird and. and stuff.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know, because that's a skullet, like that's a Jesse Ventura approved skullet, and I just don't know if it was a personal statement or some, like you said, like it's supposed to be some sort of like, in the future we don't care about our hair, like it's just like Star Trek Next Generation. But yeah, these scenes, very much. This is like a playhouse for Peter Hames, isn't it? Just
well, this is also like it's like something you see in the Carpenter's movie, like for Halloween. You know,
yeah,
what I mean? It's
shot somewhat similar to that, right?
Like
Where
a
it's
horror.
like, yeah, it's just
It's it's daring to have your final act pretty much take place in darkness. You know, where you've seen the majority of the movie, it's very much played in light, and you got a lot of shadow to stuff, but you're seeing it's taken. You know, you can see what's happening, but I suppose it's all to build on the tension that you've got two Van Dammes and which one they're going to bump into, and that's probably to play on the visual style here.
it's somewhat like a kind of Italian film in that sense. Like I don't know if that's sort of the influence, but it plays a lot with the colors red and blue, and has a lot of darkness, kind of similar to Italian thrillers. And the movie itself certainly doesn't feel like an Italian film, because it makes sense for the most part. So that's a good shot, by the way, of Van Damme up in the ceiling there, doing his best Spider-Man impression. I mean, it's cool to see Van Damme in a comic book film. I'm not a huge personal fan of comic book movies, other than the Ninja Turtles from 1990 and a few others. But I do like, for example, this film where you have like this blend of action and sci-fi, which you don't have to take too seriously, very much like a comic book. And Van Damme is himself, I think, a very good kind of, he has that chiseled kind of perfect look, right? So he looks like a comic book character out of like a Jim Lee comic book.
Oh
So-
yeah, oh for sure, yeah. I mean, it would seem, you know, silly for Van Damme not to sort of jump onto the comic book sort of demand at the time for these kind of features, and obviously I don't think it was seen as a risk at all, because due to the success of Batman, and the concept as well, time travel. To him, it'd just be like it's no brainer. You know, he's coming off the success of Universal Soldier, which kind of mix of sci-fi and action again.
Yeah.
Also, you dabbled with that with Cyborg, with science fiction and action, but to such a larger sort of canvas to sort of play on. It seems.
I've always had the impression that Van Damme himself never liked Cyborg much. I mean, I like it because I grew up with it. In later rewatchings of it, I don't find it to be a very good film. But
it's got its fan base, and they're quite avid.
It certainly
about
do.
It,
I mean,
but I love the sort of concept of it, but it's just too cheap to really sort of sell the idea, and the flashback stuff's kind of like really crap. Banner's got this awful wig on, and I understand what Pune was going with it, but it was really saved in the edit. But it still doesn't quite deliver on its.
And that's another one where Van Damme had some say in the edit, didn't he? Because Bloodsport and Bloodsport. This is something that I never feel has been explored enough with Van Damme in interviews and such. Is his editing? Because Bloodsport, he was involved in the editing. Cyborg, he was involved in the editing. In The Quest, he was involved in the editing. And The Quest is probably the worst of those.
He fell in love with that awful juddery slow-mo effects.
Right. But it's not edited badly. I mean, The Quest has other issues, but I don't think editing, like, it's not its main problem. It's shot well and looks fine, and it flows okay. But Bloodsport and Cyborg have always been credited to him coming in to help fix it. And I would be very curious to hear the stories of kind of what his mythology was doing that, because it's never been explored.
I think what he's done is like there wasn't enough of the fight to really make it like exciting in a re-edit.
Yeah.
So he's had to do the sort of, as they call, the double impact effect,
Yeah.
where he, one kick equals 3. So and he goes full bonkers with that in Lionheart. You know, it's just too much of it. It's like, what are you doing? He's trying to kick into a hurricane kicker. It's like Street Fighter, mate.
Sure. I just think there's probably an interview to be done there. I
think he could have like even done a better job with the fight scenes with Street Fighter if he had the chance to re-edit them himself. And but he's probably just too coked up at the time.
Yeah, he was showing Kylie his Thailand. You know, he's busy. He's a busy man. And
Kylie Minogue, she's never happy when that film's brought up. You know,
no,
so
probably not.
She
does a good job,
Benny.
though.
She's a good actress.
Yeah, she's okay. I like her better with Nick Cave than I do with Street Fighter.
She did a better job on Neighbours.
Yeah. Oh man, the greatest theme song of all time. My mom used to love Neighbours.
Oh yeah. I watched it for a period of time.
Wasn't there Natalie Imbruglia or something in that too?
Loads of people came from it, mate.
Okay,
Margot Robbie came from Neighbours.
Oh
as well.
wow.
Guy Pearce, Russell Crowe, all had their bit in Neighbours.
Van Damme, Van Damme was in Neighbours.
It's a weird dimension.
Yeah. He wasn't Friends. He wasn't Friends. Interesting
yeah.
thing about like Van Damme popping up like that. He wasn't Friends.
That was the thing I should have mentioned earlier with the sort of references and sort of pop culture that he was in. He's a TIMECOP guy. They were like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that was in this
kind
of era that he showed up in Friends during kind of the peak of Friends, I'd say, the sitcom. And it's funny because Jennifer Aniston has always said in interviews that like Van Damme like insisted on retakes on them kissing.
Yeah, and he kept putting his tongue in her mouth, like proper snogging her.
And the only thing I could find about Mia Sara talking about this film was that apparently the same, that he kind of slipped the tongue into the mouth a little bit too much. Just kind of enjoyed the kissing scenes a lot, and that was kind of the only thing I could find. So I guess of this era,
well, he takes his acting seriously.
Yes, I mean, the character is a tongue twister.
We have seen some, awkward movie kissing in the past. It doesn't look particularly great, but he goes full gusto.
It's not the worst I've seen. I've seen Robert Sadar make out on screen. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is kind of like a visceral plot point here now with the whole blowing up at the house, and the ticking time bomb has now been put in place, literally.
I think the bomb would have gone off like. Because I always like to do this in films where you sort of calculate the time they show you for like a countdown of bomb and how long the scene plays out. I think when the editor matches that is brilliant. But often the case they sort of drag it out a bit too long.
Yeah. It never quite works. I like this scene, by the way, where he's like seeing himself being thrown. Why didn't he just throw Van Damme?
But it's problem. Like, it's the sort of like, trick the audience to throw Van Damme aside.
Right, but I guess he's just a brute and he doesn't think ahead of time.
Yeah, he's just a dumbass.
Yeah, he physically, I mean, other than the mullet, which is very impressive, I don't find him imposing enough to really be like a standout villain. I don't know how you feel about it.
He's pretty stacked, isn't he? And
I just found him like, I don't know. I was watching wrestling at the time, and I was just like, man, they should have gotten the Undertaker or someone like, someone a little bit taller, a little bit wider, because they do portray him as such a character. And Van Damme has Bolo isn't super tall, but he's wide. He's just like barrel chested. So I always found this guy to not be the most impressive of his on-screen opponents. Again, a cool scene, and Van Damme, man, loves to be on screen twice at the same time. Also,
I love how he walks up behind him, grabs him on the shoulder, just gives him the classic Van Damme punch. But again, he just defeats him with like a couple of punches. Oh, he breaks his neck, but I think it needed just an extra kick in there.
Yeah, just one extra kick, or break his neck with a kick.
Oh, that would have been great. It's a shame he didn't do his split kick in the air. It's a shame.
Yeah, I actually will argue for the fact that like if he started doing stuff like that, it takes you out of the film here because the fighting is fairly grounded.
Contractually, I think it should be in every movie.
It should. It absolutely should. So I love the reactions coming here of like the old Ron Silver, the young Ron Silver.
Yeah, what the fuck are you doing here?
Hey, how dumb are you? And you're talking to yourself. And you can just tell that like Ron Silver got that point in the script and is just having fun with it. He never takes his movie seriously. He takes himself seriously, but not the movie.
He knows what he's doing, and
Yeah.
and I think he's having fun with it, and he knows it's a bit schlocky, and he's smarter than the material.
Yeah.
And I love the moment here because Van Damme he's always got a nice little quip. It's like especially in TimeCop, he goes, "I must be on Broadway," and he kicks him into, kicks him into it, which is not like the best visual effect in the film. It's very much like a sort of how are we going to visualize this? And I think it would have been far better if they'd done this really kind of like Rob Bottin kind of like The Thing, like all coming apart to really freak out
something
the
more
audience.
practical. Now,
Definitely, man. And at the time, they get away with it, but it has this kind of like, I think almost on purpose, a very sort of glitchy kind of effect that shows you just sort of that our time is sort of just corrupting. And I think there is other films that have done something kind of similar in terms of like what it visually looks like to sort of blend these two people together. But,
right. We did see this again in the Blade Runner sequel, when the two ladies mixed up. It was a little bit nicer than this, though. Yeah, it's weird too because you get this like weird CGI blob here. This is very well lit. I think this should have been the part where you really didn't see that much, and more like just like you said, it should have been practical. It should have been dark and kind of flashing terror. Just something where it's like yeah, you really don't want to mix yourself with your younger self because that's going to be horrifically and terrifying. Whereas here it just comes out as like kind of like kind of blobby mess. And it's like
it would have been great if like Van Damme had like a nightmare where he woke up because he'd seen it happen before.
Yeah,
just like and he wakes up, and that'll be the moment when he gets attacked in his apartment. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, that explosion again.
That's
pretty
great,
impressive.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like the RoboCop gas station explosion, which was the greatest explosion on screen ever.
It was too big, I think, at the time. It's sort of like they didn't realize.
But he's just walking through it and shooting. It's so awesome.
Yeah,
I love RoboCop.
Oh, it is like RoboCop's most perfectly edited movie ever made.
Probably.
There's no baggage at all to it. It's just like bam, bam, bam. Every shot is spot on.
I kind of put this in the same category as RoboCop, and that's not just because they both end on cop, but you have like this kind of mix of sci-fi and comic book elements, and I mean this deals with time travel rather than cyborgs and humanity, but like
and a slight inspiration of 2000 AD.
Yeah,
I
think that's where it all comes back to. Yeah, is that kind of influence. Now
he's taken those ideas and very much pared it down to something very sort of simple in its concept and very easy to sell to a general public. It's not like this is for comic book fans where it's going to be alienate some of the regular punters who are going to go see it at a weekend or Friday night box office opening, and it sort of knows where it is and completely aware of the restraints in its budget.
I mean, this made over 100 million on the box office, right?
Yeah, for '94, that was very good numbers because we weren't even seeing stuff that too. But you get like T2 and we've got like over 500 million, and Jurassic Park the year before just like destroyed everything. But for something that was an 18 rated genre piece, it was very good numbers.
Yeah. So
and I miss that with nowadays where studios aren't really catering for really adult audiences for these types of things. John Wick, we're getting that, but they're not. Yeah. It's not an 18 rated movie.
Now it's an event every time that happens. Whereas here, throughout the year you would have several, and people like Van Damme and Sylvester Stallone and Arnold kind of specialized in that area, though. But you don't really get that anymore. And I mean, this movie would have been seen as a risk, I guess, at this point. This day and age.
For now, yeah. If it had with a level of sort of like swearing and somewhat semi-violence and nudity, they would be like,
and not based on a property that was known, because I mean it is based on a comic book, but it was a one-off. Like it was an anthology comic book, kind of published in Dark Horse's stuff. So it's not like it was a long-running comic book
No,
that you picked up on shelves. After the movie came out, they did package the issues together.
That's what I got.
For a paperback.
I wish I kept them.
I have them. Yeah.
Yeah, I must have. I should.
Pretty good artwork. I mean, honestly, it's drawn pretty well. The writing is okay. As I said earlier, it's more like it's a neat concept. The execution isn't perfect, and I think leading into this film, they realized that, and then the script for this, I think, is much better than the comic. And I think the script for this is pretty neat, and I think it opens us up. It opens up to more adventures. We didn't get it until the sequel, which was with Jason Scott Lee, and I think it came out in like 2004 or 5.
Yeah, it very much was like a Sci-Fi Channel kind of production.
Yeah, it's very straight to
barely
video.
a movie. I think it's like 88 minutes or 85 minutes, something like that.
It's interesting in the sense that you get to see Jason Scott Lee in another martial arts role, which he probably should have gotten much more of.
I know, yeah, despite dragging the Bruce Lee story, sort of playing fast and loose with the facts, he really
he's very good.
He sells the idea that he is Bruce Lee.
He was a dancer turned martial artist. I mean, he's practiced ever since, and
he still practices Jeet Kune Do, doesn't he?
Yeah. He's an instructor in it. So he started living that life, and he's very good. Just doesn't get enough roles in the martial arts. I mean, he doesn't get enough roles in general. Jason Scott Lee is a very good actor.
He popped up in Mulan, didn't he? The sort of Disney live action one. But it's great that he's come back. I don't know this child.
Yeah, I think this will be a very awkward.
Awkward, weird.
Especially since the child is now like 13. Or whatever, and not looking too good. He's just staring off into nothing.
Just a bowl of hair he's got. I used to have that.
I used to have that haircut.
I think you did, Audi. You showed me a photo when you were a kid. And I was like, "That's a bowl of hair." That's
actually me. There was also a TV show based on this. We didn't get to mention that. There was a TV show that ran one season. Had 9 episodes. Not bad. I think.
Is it? Would you say it's better than the sequel movie?
Yes.
Okay.
So the TV show kind of goes into the kind of adventures that you would expect this sequels to go into. It's just kind of a case of the week sci-fi show, very much of the 90s, very quippy. You have Max Walker come back, and then like it's not played by Van Damme, it's another actor, and then some other character actors from television. I think it was a Canadian production, if I'm not wrong, which most of them always are. But it's not bad. So if you can kind of track that down, I'd definitely give TimeCop, the TV show, a chance. Knowing that's a 90s sci-fi show, it's very much of
of its
the
time
X-Files,
well.
the X-Files era of kind of like case of the week and some interesting action. But it's very comic booky. It's very schlocky. It's a nice show, and only one season. So
it's unfortunate the film ends with a kind of crappy kind of like licensed song at the end. It doesn't kind of fit the tone of the film. It should have just had the score play out. You can see its kind of errors with its time travel stuff, and it's kind of, if you could just go along with its goofiness and kind of simplistic attitude towards time travel, then you'd have a lot of fun watching it. And I think still to this day, I think when people think of Van Damme, they think of Bloodsport and TimeCop, as those two are the sort of ones that sort of one gained one audience of martial arts fans, and this kind of really sort of commercialized him as this kind of a sort of leading man in the kind of action, more kind of just genre piece. And it's unfortunate that he kind of dovetailed this with kind of Street Fighter, where his acting was like he's not really in it, like taking it seriously and not entirely
really
focused.
Because he got the Columbia deal, right? Or was it a Sony deal? Like he had a
Columbia
deal.
sort of Sony deal after what was it, The Quest? Yeah.
And if he was on a better track at the time, personally, he probably would have ended up doing more films, more fondly remembered. I think he would admit this today.
And as we've seen there, we just had an Arnold documentary, and we've got a Stallone one coming up soon, which is really interesting. And there's definitely an opportunity for them to do one with Van Damme, because he has a very illustrious career, which is really, I think, a lot of kind of interesting drama to it.
Yeah,
And,
I think more so than most of his contemporaries.
Yeah. So I think
And
that would be.
I mean, he's done that show we mentioned behind the closed doors.
Yeah, we did.
But it's very much of like the time. It's very British, kind of like
Osborne sort of thing.
Yeah, it feels a bit fabricated in times, and it gives a nice look at him though, and he seems very honest. And I think that's where, if you look at something like JCVD, I think he's ready to tell that story. So yeah, a documentary about him would be awesome.
Sexy robot illustrations. What?
Majima Sorayama. Yeah, where were they? Like,
it must be in the tech guy's office.
Yeah, they were.
That's the only thing I can think of. It's the highlight of Van Damme's sort of box office success. That sort of he didn't quite. Well, I suppose Street Fighter made money, but that was kind of the sort of end up downward sort of spiral. But again, I love Sudden Death, and that's a following year, and then. Actually, I quite enjoy Maximum Risk. The more I watched it, I think the better it got.
I like Rex. I did the commentary for the re-release of that.
You did, didn't you? I need to listen to that. I've not got around to it.
I was sick during that time too. So.
Oh, we go. Continuity, mate. Okay, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the commentary. Again, me and Audi will be back in future with some more Van Damme or potentially other films outside of Van Damme as well for commentaries.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.